Hey everyone, welcome. Have you ever wondered how cells move things against the flow, like pushing a boulder uphill, or how our cells move substances against the flow, like swimming upstream instead of going with the flow of the current? Well, in this micro lecture, we will explore this amazing transport mechanism in our cells called the active transport. We will explore how this transport system works and why it is important. What is active transport? Before we dive right into active transport, we will first recall what passive transport is. Again, passive transport is the transport mechanism of the cells that goes with the concentration gradient of high to low concentration. So in my example earlier, passive transport is like pushing the boulder downhill and swimming with the flow, so you don't really need to exert much energy. Speaking of energy, active transport is in need of energy to work as it moves molecules against their concentration gradient from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. Imagine trying to force more people into an already crowded room. So, to counter the concentration gradient, you would need some extra energy to make that happen, which is in the form of ATP. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the cell's energy currency. In active transport, ATP binds to transport proteins in the cell membrane. This binding changes the shape of the protein, allowing it to grab the molecule and push it to the other side of the membrane. There are two main types of active transport, primary and secondary. Primary active transport uses ATP directly, while secondary active transport uses the electrochemical gradient created by the primary active transport. The most well-known example of primary active transport is the sodium-potassium pump, which moves 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell. Now, let's talk about bulk transport, moving big stuff in and out of the cell. There are instances when a cell needs to extend energy for transporting larger molecules. This is where endocytosis and exocytosis come into play. Endocytosis is how cells engulf large particles or droplets. The cell membrane wraps around the substance, forming a vesicle that brings it into the cell. There are different types of endocytosis depending on how the cell absorbs materials. These include phagocytosis, otherwise known as cell eating, wherein the target molecule is wrapped around and engulfed into a vacuole. Receptor-mediated endocytosis, wherein specific substances must bind to receptors before they can enter the cell. And pinocytosis, otherwise known as cell drinking, wherein cells would be able to take in fluids. Exocytosis is the opposite. It's how cells expel large molecules or waste products. The term exo relates to exit. A vesicle fuses with the cell membrane, releasing its contents outside the cell. Think of endocytosis as the cell's way of ordering takeout and exocytosis as the cell's way of taking out the trash. So where does active transport happen in real life? Everywhere. For example, nerve cells use the sodium-potassium pump to maintain electrical gradients necessary for nerve impulses. Your small intestine uses active transport to absorb nutrients from the food you eat. And cells in your pancreas use exocytosis to secrete insulin, which regulates blood sugar levels. These are just some of the few examples of how active transport keeps us alive and functioning. Let's recap. Active transport is the movement of molecules against their concentration gradient, requiring energy in the form of ATP. Endocytosis brings substances into the cell, while exocytosis expels them out. Active transport is vital for nerve function, nutrient absorption, hormone secretion, and many other biological processes. Thanks for watching! I hope you have a better understanding of active transport. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. Mabuhay!